How did you find out about Salesforce?
Well, so it was kind of weird. Like I said, I knew about Salesforce, right? Because I was using it at work, but I didn't realize there was a career, that there was an industry there. And so part of my post-Army thing, I decided to go back to school and do an executive MBA program. And one of my classmates mentioned, oh, have you heard about this VetForce program, Salesforce? So I know that was the day, I think November 2017 or something, I logged into the Trailhead for the first time. So I said I knew about Salesforce, but I didn't know that there were careers, that there was an industry, that there was that much opportunity there. So that was kind of what really exposed me to it. And, and I think back then, you went to Trailhead and there were three careers, right? There was like a BA, admin, and a developer. And the developer made way more money than everybody else. So I was like, oh, okay, well, then I'll be a developer. With knowing nothing about coding, it was like, yeah, it's so good, but it looks like Trailhead will teach me. That's what I thought. And back then, or probably even still the same, but like that intro, beginner admin, beginner developer trails are 90% the same. So I'm just kind of chunking along, creating my custom fields and, validation. Well, yeah, I got this. Until like there's like that very first, like, make a trigger thing. And it's, looking back on it now, it seems like the most trivial, like, it's like capitalize a string. But just blew my mind. So that's where the wheels kind of came off on the developer thing, and I had to regroup and put a couple years of work into it. But eventually it all happened. So, I guess that's kind of how I discovered it. I kind of describe it as kind of like from an accidental admin to very deliberate developer would have been kind of my career journey.
So you found out about Salesforce through VetForce?
No, so I found out about Salesforce because my first job just had me using Salesforce. Prior to that, I'd never heard of it.
I see.
Was it a sales job? Things that kind of like exposed me to the fact that this was a career, an industry, that there were tons of jobs, tons of opportunity out there.
Brooks, when you started using Salesforce at that job in 2016, were you in a sales position?
No. It was actually sort of a recruiting business development. It's kind of a weird role. A little bit of a sales ops type component. So we weren't using we're not using Salesforce in a traditional, like, lead to contact opportunity type sense. And it's more that I'm saying that, the job needed a database, and Salesforce is what they had. Which frankly, that's in my career since then, I've seen that quite a bit with different clients. Is a lot of very unconventional uses of Salesforce. That's just the database that's being used. Very rarely do I feel like I ever get to work with like that classic, like, lead to contact opportunity, forecasting, territory management type sales flow.
Got it. All right. And you spent like 2 years there or some in this sales ops role, Salesforce sales support role. And then you got your first full Salesforce.
So I was looking around, and at this point I knew, like, so my whole team got laid off anyway. So it was actually good timing, because I knew at this point, hey, I was ready. I want to move from kind of having one foot in the Salesforce industry to working in Salesforce. Like, I want to be a Salesforce professional. So it was a really, I think, kind of the perfect job for me at the time. And this is what I think for a lot of people that are interested in becoming Salesforce developers. It was a company, they wanted an admin especially an admin that was interested in learning or growing into the developer side. And I'm going to say, I feel like you'll typically find that with smaller roles. Like, if it's a giant, if it's a giant, like, enterprise org with hundreds, thousands of end users and a million, the stakes are just too high to have, somebody kind of like learning the program. But if it's a pretty small org, that could be a pretty good place, as you're an admin. And in my case, right, as your skills grow, right, you just start to take on more and more projects. So that was kind of, I'm going to say, I feel like how I kind of really learned to start to work and develop on the platform.
Okay, so can I ask a question?
Sure.
So Brooks, was it the mentor network where you got laid off, actually?
Yes.
Okay, so at that point in time, when you got laid off from the mentor network, had you gotten any certifications?
No, I was working actively towards them though, so I probably had my admin within a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So had you passed Platform Developer 1 at the time that before you started at Athena?
No.
Okay. So you were brought in as a Salesforce admin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I said it was they wanted an admin they were very supportive of learning the programmatic side of the platform.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like it was ideal as far as, yeah.
And I'm a big believer, I think, even though I don't do very much declarative work anymore, that Salesforce developers really do need to understand that side of the platform. It's just, it's not like developing on, it's the only, I think as a programmer, it's the only thing where you have to worry about non-programmers breaking your code, essentially. I mean, I think the classic example is always the process builder that, causes a recursive trigger, but no other developers really have to worry about those sorts of challenges. I think that's very unique to Salesforce.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Brooks, you left your first job.
Mm-hmm.
You were looking for a job. Was it difficult to find your first Salesforce job?
I feel like no. I'm going to say, so it wasn't as easy as I had first thought. So I was fortunate in the sense that I kind of had some Salesforce experience. So even though I had not been certified or like a true full-time admin, I had some background with the platform that I felt, comfortable having on my resume and, that sort of thing. But it's still, I feel like it's always a little bit of a challenge. Obviously overcomable, or none of us would have ever, everybody's got to get their first job at some point. But sometimes I feel like, especially the admin certification gets a little over marketed to, if you pass this, jobs will just land in your lap. And I remember I got my PMP certification on my way out of the Army. And I thought money was just going to rain down from heaven when I passed that thing. And, it never got me a job. I don't think it ever even got a recruiter to call me back. So certifications can be great, but obviously they can be tough if you don't have experience to put them. So it was. So I don't know if that answers the question. It was harder than maybe I expected it to be, but I think I was fortunate that I had been working with Salesforce prior to, and I still feel like even now there weren't quite as many newly certified admins and things coming out onto the job.
How long did it take you to find your first job?
Let's see. Every 2 months. Right around there.
When you left the mentor network, by that point, when you were still working there, did you spend any time with any of the declarative customizations like workflows, processes?
No. You
did not?
No.
Okay.
I was learning them on Trailhead, but I couldn't get anybody to give me access to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Wow. So why did they hire you then? If you knew so little, did they just like you? Did you seem like someone who would learn a lot and can be catching?
Which job are we talking about?
Sorry, the first job.
Okay. Well, so I was not a Salesforce admin. I mean, so I was, the function was, I'm going to say, sales. So Salesforce was one component of what I did there. But it was closer to maybe a BA role, right? Like I would kind of talk to end user. They didn't even have a CRM system in place. And so this was kind of new. I had worked with some CRM type systems in the Army. And at that time, like, hey, okay, well, this makes sense. And they thought it did too. We'll hire this guy. He's worked with these things before. Not understanding how different Salesforce was. But yeah, I would kind of like talk to end users and get requirements and go back to IT. But at that time, I also didn't realize, right, like how fast and easy. So if I would say I need a value added to a pick list, and like, okay, let's get to go in the backlog, and in 6 weeks you'll get your pick list out. Which at the time I said like, oh, that's realistic. But they need a developer to add which of course now I realize, right, like we could have added pick list values in 5 minutes.
I see. So interesting. So I think that was like your first Salesforce role, yeah?
Yeah.
That was.
Mm-hmm. So when you were hired at Athena, were you hired to be doing 100% Salesforce, or was that just a portion?
100% Salesforce.
100%. Okay.
Yeah. I find that a bunch of my students, mentees, the most difficult thing is finding the first job, and that's why we're so thinking, how can we crack this? And would you have some advice for Rob and others about how can they get their first job? Was there something that you did that other people did not do, you think? Or were you well prepared? Were you a good presenter?
I will say I believe that I interview well. I think that's just a skill that I have. Maybe, I mean, I live in the Boston area, which is a pretty good job market. Something I really recommend, especially if you're looking for your first job, or even when I was interviewing with my last job, was have some kind of a portfolio. I mean, you have that free developer org where I truly believe, especially if you're looking for your first job, like build a small org that represents a business, right? From lead to contact, opportunity, forecasting, do all that stuff. Your flows, your process builder, your page layouts, a community that you can show to employers that, hey, so I haven't, got it. I don't have true commercial 40-hour-a-week experience yet, but here is an example of the work that I've done.
Got it. So you had a portfolio that you showed at the interviewer, and
no, I did not. I did that kind of my second time around as a developer.
I see.
But as an admin, no. But it's something I would recommend doing now if you're trying to stand out in the market.
Got it.
Because hiring's always a risk, and you're always the more things that I think you can do to alleviate a hiring manager's concerns, because a lot of hiring, this is my especially in the Salesforce industry, and say it, I don't know, but I feel like a lot of hiring managers don't necessarily, they're hiring a Salesforce person, but unless they have a whole team, a lot of times they don't really know what they're looking for. So they're hoping like that Salesforce is that's why I think certs are useful for hiring managers that don't know what questions to ask.
It's a shortcut, right?
Yeah.
Hard for them to know what they don't even know about Salesforce. How can they interview? So at least this gives them some confidence that Salesforce asserts you do know.
Right. If you're interviewing like a real, like it's a big org, right? And they've got 4 or 5 admins and architects, like they're going to ask you, they're going to go ask you real technical questions. But if it's not like you're interviewing with like, the sales director and he's not a technical person at all, the more things you can do, I think, to alleviate, and I think that's going to be common. I think the more things you can do to just demonstrate to a non-technical person that you have the skills they're looking for, the better off you'll be.
Mm-hmm. And like portfolio project would be something that can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I even did that. I think at one point, just because I kind of wanted to like just build my own skills, right? It's like, I mean, I just like built like an org for like a little, like a medical supply company and products and price books and forecasting and some flows and process builder and that kind of stuff.
And when you were looking for your first job, did you apply through LinkedIn or did you find it through the Trailblazer community group meetups, or did you just find it through your personal network? How did you
LinkedIn.
tap into that
I mean,
first job?
I'm sort of a job board like that.
Say again, sorry?
LinkedIn or even
LinkedIn?
some sort of some kind of I know I just a cold application online.
I see. All right. I thought maybe you also did cold calling, like maybe like informational interviews or something like unusual.
No. I was just I was doing the shotgun blast resume thing, which I realize is completely like everybody says don't do it, but it's always kind of worked for me.
Shotgun blast. All right. So I think we answered all the questions about getting the first job. Does anyone have a question about getting the first job before we jump into the next topic of development? Because this is a very big topic, is getting the first job. And
yeah, and I mean, what he achieved, the main problem we're kind of sensing, feeling, running into is the fact that little to no work experience, regardless of your certifications. Most places typically want to see like 2 years plus, and I know that's kind of a wish, but you go right in there and you say I have almost no work experience. It's like the kiss of death, practically.
It is, and that's why I mean, the best that I think I could is the more things you can do to set yourself apart. And I'm going to forget. I just spaced on the author's name, and I'm going to Google it while we're talking. The book, "So Good They Can't Ignore You," I gave it to my son.
So good they can't ignore you.
So Good They Can't Ignore You: Why Skills Trump Passion on the Quest for Work by Cal Newport. Highly, and I guess that's kind of been my philosophy ever since, is just to just keep working and keep grinding until you're just so good somebody's got to say yes, right? Like, if 2 certifications and no work experience, then I'll get 3. And I think, especially with certifications, I think they actually become even more valuable when you're looking for that first job. Somebody with no work experience but 2 or 3 certifications, I mean, to me that says, hey, this person is really investing and is hungry and is working hard. And I'm going to say, like, I think I did admin and platform app builder and in 6 weeks, something like that. So definitely doable. I have other thoughts about certifications now after a few years in the industry. But it's always, that first job's always tough. But I think portfolios, just the skills, do work, post on it on LinkedIn, whatever. Just keep getting better every day, and you'll get a job.
What kept you motivated in getting your first job? Did you have a mentor or a friend, or is it just personal drive? Because it's not easy to keep pushing.
To feed the kids. Personal drive, right? But I mean, you know what I mean? Like, probably like everybody else, I have a family and responsibilities, and I was still very much in that second career, trying to just figure out what the heck am I going to do with the next 20-some working years of my life after the military, and really just kind of, resetting and starting over in my 40s.
So just keep pushing yourself, yeah?
Yeah.
Was there any period you were like, oh my God, maybe it's not for me. Maybe I should go back to military, something that is...
No. I don't think we ever doubted that leaving. So we knew we were going to have to leave the military no matter what. And, my wife and I remember we felt that, hey, like if we want to, we could stay for a few more years, but one way or another, I'm going to have to leave and start a new career. And so let's just go do it. But it was, I think there were times on trying to like learn to code and things. So I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to understand this stuff. But I never doubted that starting a new career was the right choice. But again, like I said, I'm in a place now where if we go back to June of 2016, when I was officially a civilian, like I would not have been in my top 1,000 jobs, right? I mean, developers all have master's degrees from MIT and they're geniuses, right? It's not guys like me.
Got it. It's just when you're looking for a job, I think in US is very difficult, especially we have a lot of bills coming, and then you're like, maybe you come to the finish line, you think you get an offer, but you don't. Then you again interview, and then you have to keep trying. I
think true. Like, I mean, it is a struggle, and it is always hard. But I think especially once you do get that first paying commercial Salesforce job, I feel like you're in now. Like that changes everything.
Yeah.
Once you've got a couple years under your belt, who knows? I mean, I always say like it's tech and it's disruptive, and I always worry, right? Somebody's going to come and kill Salesforce, but I think once you get those first couple of years, then you're in a pretty good shape.
Yeah, that's. But it's like making the first $1 million, getting that first.
It is. But I remember this is the first video of yours I ever saw, and it was reasons not to become a Salesforce developer. And one of your reasons was because you don't want recruiters to call you all day. Which, it's very like I remember in 2016, flashing back to 2016, leaving the military, I couldn't get a recruiter to give me a call. To where, now I feel like it's just like kind of this endless unsolicited bombardment all day long.
Cool. All right, let's go to the next topic. Very exciting topic, which is becoming a developer. So getting a first job is tough. Becoming developer, I think, is equally tough. Yeah, because especially for people like you are already in your 40s probably. Your undergrad was in humanities.
Yeah.
You did
history degree,
engineering, and now you have a goal. You want to become a developer. Like, first of all, why you said you want to become a developer because they paid the most, right? That's typically what most people choose to do, right? But when you started the process of becoming a developer, you probably struck reality. Yeah, there were like a lot of challenges, confusions, and can you tell us about the process of you becoming a developer?
Yeah, and I look back on it, and I feel like it was very unfocused. And maybe that's just kind of my hindsight. I think maybe I had done a little like free code academy stuff prior to, HTML, CSS. And so I remember this is all kind of leaving the Army. And I remember like data, even now, like data science, that was the big sexy job. And that seemed interesting. It's like, oh, well, maybe I'll do something like that with data, which is what I do now. And I work for a company that focuses on data. But, I remember seeing those first, it was with R, the programming language R, right? I'm like, now make a loop. But I don't even know what a loop is. So it was, I'm going to say for me, for Salesforce, I had some exposure to some very scattered, a little bit of JavaScript here, a little bit of R there. So I started doing Trailhead, realized that Trailhead is a fantastic tool, but it's not a place to learn how to code. It really is not. So I think I signed up then for David Liu's Apex Academy on Pluralsight, which highly recommend. Great course. And I thought, well, this will make me a developer. And it's a great course, and it introduced me to a lot of very fundamental concepts of programming on the Salesforce platform. But, like looking back on it, and no stretch were you really like a job ready developer after that. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, so there was like the ability to kind of take these very small things I was learning from, whether it was Trailhead, I would try to study, and this is something I really recommend, is Java. I feel like there's still not tons of great Apex resources out there in the world, mm-hmm. but there's lots of Java stuff. And in my opinion, it's 90% crossover. I mean, at the end of the day, Apex compiles down to Java anyway. Was learning Java. And, as I started, I think, just to kind of understand these concepts, and this is what a class and a method and et cetera, and, object-oriented programming, but just like bit by bit. And this was at Athena, but I was able to, do small things at work. I remember writing my first, asynchronous Apex class, or to do like a roll-up, custom roll-up on with a lookup relationship. But that gave me a great and because it was a small org, kind of a low stakes way to learn. But then I'm going to say it was really a relentless couple years of self-study on my part. I would get up early. I would study on the training. I would study on the train for an hour. I'd get to my desk around 7, and I would try to just study Salesforce or something for another hour or so before the workday started. So it was a combination, I think, of having the right job and the right employer that supported that kind of growth. But going back, there's just software development, programming. It's kind of a skill, a trade. I used to say, like being a musician or a carpenter. There's no substitute for just practice and just doing it every day.
So useful for you, David Liu's Apex Academy. Mm-hmm. What would you say is second most useful?
What I really like, two things I think are great. If we're using Pluralsight already, and we're already using David Liu's Apex Academy, there's tons of other really good Salesforce. So I'm just going to say Pluralsight is a great reference. Scott Lee has some fantastic courses on there, especially with I remember asynchronous Apex was a huge help to me. All of Don Robbins' Salesforce play-by-plays are fantastic. Dan Appleman stuff. So I think Pluralsight is just a fantastic reference. I really liked for Java Team Treehouse. I probably tried every single web-based learn to code, Udemy, Code Academy, etc. I really liked Team Treehouse and their Java courses, and some of their computer science courses, and that was also, I think, very, very helpful to me.
Okay.
And I'm just looking over here. I'm looking at my bookshelf. The Head First books, right? I think are also very useful.
I see.
But I really think Java. This is something I forgot. There is a great Java course on Udemy.
Tim Buchalka.
That's the one, right? That helped me understand object-oriented programming.
Yeah.
That's
Tim Buchalka.
That was the one. Oh. Yeah, that was the one that really helped me then learn from him and apply it to Salesforce and Apex.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I also read Head First and Java, but I felt like sometimes I was confused about the application of certain Java concepts to Apex. I was like, those array lists and hash maps and some things, and I was like, how is this in Salesforce? Where are the array lists? And so sometimes it helped me in some places, but sometimes it would confuse me.
There's definitely more data types in Java than Apex.
Yeah,
But
like those.
that's, I mean, because when it compiles, right, Salesforce kind of decides for you, if it's a tree map or a hash map.
I see. All right. So these are the resources you use and that help you get your projects or like get your experience.
Yeah.
All right. And in your current role, you're a developer, right? Salesforce developer?
Yeah.
And that's your first developer role.
So by the time I left Athena, I was probably doing development 40 hours a week.
Okay.
That role kind of progressed, and as I got better, I spent more and more time writing code and less time doing declarative stuff.
I see.
Cervelo is we're a Salesforce. A little bit about Cervelo. So Cervelo is we're a Salesforce Gold partner. We're a Carney company that really specializes in helping clients work with data and connecting dots, optimizing the data, business strategy, solving problems. And I am in our Salesforce practice, and specialize obviously in helping clients with their investments on the Salesforce platform. So this would be, I say, my first job. I don't want to say as a Salesforce developer because that's what I was doing when I left Athena. But my first, particularly also being as part of a team, right? Working with groups of, BAs and developers and architects and, working with different orgs and all the other things that consulting brings with it.
I see. So previously you were just alone. You were the Salesforce SME?
I was, yeah. We did then towards the end have one kind of junior admin that took over. He started to take over a lot of the declarative stuff, and I would focus more on the programmatic.
I see.
But it was really, one person shop for the most part.
I see. Very interesting. All right. What do you do in your current job?
So I've been on a couple different projects now with Cervelo. Typical, I'm going to say, I am probably most days, I am coding, got the daily scrum, and then I'm probably writing code for 7.5, 8 hours for the rest of the day. The last couple months, what I've been working on is a lot of big integration projects with some identity management stuff, but I've been building a lot of REST APIs on the Salesforce platform to integrate Salesforce data with external services and doing a lot, managed packages, encryption, a lot of, so that's, not a trigger in sight, right? So there's a lot more to it than I think when you're first starting. So that's what typical day, right? I'm gonna one meeting, maybe two. Then I mostly write code. Current project has been focused a lot on designing APIs.
Got it. So before this crisis happened, the COVID crisis, were you on client sites a lot of days, or were you working from home already?
The two projects I was on with Cervelo so far. First one, you just worked remote or you went to the Cervelo Boston office. The one I'm on now is mostly client site, but it was a local client. And obviously, right, I've been in my basement for the last 6 weeks.
So right now you're a Salesforce developer, and do you find that sometimes you lack certain knowledge because you don't have computer science background?
Yes. But I think to me, I think the most important thing when I talk about is to be aware of that, and that it's very overcomable. I don't feel like that's so much anymore because most of my coworkers do have CS degrees. And I don't understand graph theory all that well, but it doesn't really come up in my day-to-day life. The things that I think are kind of important to understand, I think a lot of self-taught developers, that the knock against self-taught developers and like boot camp grads tends to be lack of understanding of some of the classic like algorithms and data structures. And I'm going to talk about the concept of like space and time complexity. Because sometimes your code works, but you don't always understand why the way you designed it is not scalable. It's a poor design. Those things are all. I mean, I think that's the one thing computer science grads have that a person from a non-traditional background may not. But there's 100 great resources on the internet, to self-study and learn. You'll learn merge sort and binary search, and how to do a stack and a queue, etc.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do in such situations? Do you just talk to a computer science grad, or you just learning these theories on Udemy through courses?
So I would say for me it has been more of, it was never a problem at work. Like, Brooks over there, he doesn't understand binary search, right? We can't put him on this project. He doesn't have a CS degree. I guess I approached it from the beginning as looking like, hey, these are things that would probably be useful for me to know that I feel like I don't. And then just trying to take that and apply it to my everyday work.
Mm-hmm.
But it was never anything that I think hindered me, except maybe early on, I will always say not understanding why nested for loops were a bad idea. That's the example I give. Like, I didn't understand the concept of time complexity, big O notation, etc. Nested for loop will work, but I would say it's an easy way to blow through, your CPU governor limit on the Salesforce platform, right? So those are the sorts of things that I think just come with time.
Cool. So you've been a developer for the past 2, maybe 3 years.
Yeah.
What do you like the most about being a Salesforce developer?
The things I really like, and this goes back, I remember seeing your, the first video I saw of yours that was, I can't think of almost ever a day where I didn't learn something new. There's just about always something new that I have to learn every day, or something I have to figure out. And I enjoy that, and I enjoy the problem solving. I don't know if it was in David Liu's Apex Academy, but it's his quote I'll steal from. But he talked about one thing he loved about programming was you would get these problems, and it was just kind of you and the screen. He's like, the screen is your canvas and your brain is the brush, and you are going to paint a picture and solve the problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. And every day I'm learning. Just yesterday I learned something. I'm like, whoa. And
it's such a huge platform, right? And nobody knows everything. There's always, I just can't imagine, and whether it's not even Salesforce, right? There's so many other things as a developer you'll realize along the way that you need to know, whether it's Git or command line or, bash scripting, right? It's like, it just never stops. And sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, but generally it's fun.
Yeah, feels good to get smarter every day, right?
Yeah.
And to be better.
Absolutely.
All right. And what was the biggest surprise you felt when you were becoming a developer? Was there something like, oh, really? That's what developers do? Or is that it? Or
I would say when I think about surprises, what was I going to think of for that? I think what really surprised me, the two things are, so when I first started, I remember I only started, but I don't know, if I signed up for some course on the internet, I can't remember even what programming language it was. It was JavaScript or something anyway, and I was just overwhelmed by this. And I reached out to a friend who had been a software developer for many years, and I said, well, how do you memorize all this stuff? I was like, anybody's supposed to memorize all of this. So like, you don't. He's like, like the stuff you do every day, that'll sink in and you'll learn that. But otherwise, he's like, you're just going to look stuff up every day. That's part of the job, right? And now I've heard it called just-in-time learning, but that was, I think initially, right, because you kind of come from this education background of, well, I got to memorize everything. And now I'm like, well, of course, oh, here's a problem with the string. I bet there's this method on the string object I can use that was like, I'll just go to Google and look it up. And the thing I talk about a lot that I think, and if it was a surprise or more of a realization as a programmer, is that syntax is mostly muscle memory, and syntax is not being a developer is not about syntax. And what I mean by that is when you're first starting, and I know when I was like, and you see develop, and they've got their IDE up, right, the dark screen and all the different colors, and it's intimidating, right? Because and there's all these arcane symbols and variables. And I firmly believe, right, like it's a rite of passage as a new developer to spend 4 hours trying to debug a program because you forgot a semicolon. But in 6 months, I said, like, syntax to me largely becomes muscle memory, right? Like, I mean, that you're going to use a square bracket to index a collection, etc. Syntax will come with practice, but there's so much. I mean, to me, being a developer is really much more about efficient designs and structure, and syntax is, by far the least interesting part, even though it's the hardest thing when you're first starting out. I remember, my first hello world trigger with David Liu, and you're constantly looking back and forth, like, are those commas in the for loop, are they semicolons? Keep that stuff will burn into your fingers eventually. Just keep practicing. But that's why I say there's way more to being a developer than syntax.
Yeah, I agree with you on that advice about how, as a developer, you don't really need to know that much. Yeah, just need to know the essential skills. Like, we come from a background where we'll try to learn everything, memorize things, and if you don't know it, then that's it, right? That's the limit of your knowledge. But for developers, the Google is your limit, right? And
I think if you are a good problem solver, and you'll learn and get better as your experience grows. I mean, prior to this project I'm on, I didn't have a lot of experience with REST API design, but now it's something I feel pretty comfortable with after I've done 3 or 4 of them.
So you've went through a fascinating career journey, career change, becoming a developer, overcoming certain challenges. If you could go back to your learning journey, your journey of becoming a Salesforce developer, what do you think was your biggest mistake, and how would you fix it?
So I tend to think when I was first learning, I'm usually just as a programmer or trying to learn to be a developer, that I was very unfocused, and I'd be doing JavaScript this week and Java the next week, and I don't know, Python the week after that. We're talking about Salesforce. So obviously, it's going to be Apex. It's going to be Java. But, I was just pick a language and stick with it, because once you learn one language, right, programming concepts are all kind of the same. A loop is a loop. An if statement is an if statement, etc. And I think the thing that was, if I had to look back on mistakes or that I could have done, and I maybe this will always be the same, that you'll always look back at the code that you wrote 6 months ago, the code that you wrote a year ago, and you're like, oh man, that's terrible. Like, why did I do it that way? But I think I look back on it, especially because I think I didn't understand. I was starting to learn how to code, to write instructions for a machine, because that's all it really is. But I didn't understand clean code, right? Which is another book I highly recommend is Clean Code. And I didn't understand, say, like, why writing like giant God classes full of, unmaintainable spaghetti code. Why that was a bad idea. So maybe that was just kind of career growth along the way. The other thing I think I talked a lot about, especially about Salesforce, is I didn't understand how important naming things is, especially the API names when you create a custom field. I agonize over that now because you're kind of stuck with it, especially once it starts to get tied into your Apex code, changing an API name. So this is just Salesforce specific, but I'm a big believer that there should never be an empty description field in any Salesforce org, right? If you create a custom field, I think at a bare minimum, it should have your name, the date you created, and the business case. That's why, Brooks Johnson created this on 1 May, and this is why I created this field. And API names, this is something I learned the hard way. Don't tie them to particular products or a very particular use case. I was on this project, right? And so we were doing this thing so I named all these the fields after the product we were using, right? But then we changed to a different product, 6 months later. So now you're stuck with all these API names in your code that don't make any sense, that are confusing to everybody that comes after you. So yeah, naming stuff is hard. But that's I'm going to say now a computer science cliche. But those were the things where I look back on things that I did a couple years ago. That I, think I do better now.
I find it amazing how much energy you have in learning all these different things like Python, JavaScript, Java. And is this just your nature? Or it seems like one of the reasons why you are so successful is you're just always learning. Even if you like learning chaotically, but you're still learning. It's amazing.
I like learning. I do enjoy learning. I think that's an important part of being a developer. But like I said, if I was to, I wasn't focused. I think it took me longer to get going because I wasn't focused. I kind of knew I wanted to be a developer, but I didn't really quite understand how to get there. And I'm still bad about it, right? I'll get halfway through one Udemy course and see something else that looks interesting, and let's sign up for that one now. But I think especially when you're learning to code, pick a language and stick with it. I think the exception I think I would make now again is Apex and Java, because I think they're so close that, say we talked about Tim Bachalka's Java course on Udemy, which, 5 stars, will absolutely make you a better Salesforce developer.
One of the things I suggest to my students is when you learn, the important thing is to study every day, consistency. Mm-hmm. Even if just, it's better, of course, 2-3 hours every day, but even a little bit is good.
Yep.
And your progress is better. You don't even notice that you're making progress, and boom, in a couple of weeks, you're so much ahead. What were some of the good habits you had, strategies that worked for you in mastering Apex?
So I'm going to agree with you. It was really a lot of practice and really trying to, like I said, I had about an hour train ride. I would try to practice on the train on the way to and on the way back. And I got to work an hour early, and I tried to be at my desk at 7 just so I could keep practicing and studying. So there really is, I don't know if there's a habit. It's just, like I said, kind of going back to that concept of the book I talked about, so good they can't ignore you, or it was, Seneca, one of the Stoic philosophers, would say, just decide what it is you want to be and then go be that thing. So there's just, but I think especially programming, right? It really does take, it is a very specific set of hard skills. And I think it really just, what you said, does take just daily practice.
Daily practice, yeah. There's no way, it's better than cramming, right? Studying on the weekend.
And, when we talked about it, or I talked, that syntax is muscle memory. That's a byproduct of practice, right? That eventually you just won't think about how to structure a do while loop, right? It just comes out of your fingertips to the keyboard. But that takes time.
Mm-hmm. All right. In your current role as a Salesforce developer,
Mm-hmm.
do you interview candidates?
I have done one interview in my current job, and it was not like a real technical interview.
I see. I was just curious to hear if you've interviewed a whole bunch of people, what is a common weakness that new candidates have, like
Mm-hmm.
freshers have, and what advice you would give to Rob and others so that they can overcome that weakness?
So what I feel like I've seen, and this is maybe just more picking it up as I get to know people and understand the market, is particularly there's a lot of, you learn, especially because I feel like a lot of the full stack stuff these days, it focuses on JavaScript, right? You learn JavaScript, you learn Node, but not really understanding, I'm going to say, object-oriented programming. And that, I think, to me, was something that took a while to understand. Is like, so like when I started, okay, well, Apex is an object-oriented language. I learned that on like day one. I didn't really know what it meant, but I assumed I was doing object-oriented programming because the language was. I think it's kind of not always understanding, and that's, I think, where Tim Pachalka's course, right, is so good. You will learn, inheritance and composition, interfaces, and virtual and abstract classes, and all that stuff that is, you don't need it for PD1, but it will become important later on. But I think that's, for me, was all was useful.
Cool. All right. Probably my last question, then I'll open up the floor to the rest. So what do you think about Salesforce certifications? You said your opinion changed about them after you got a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, so I've got 10 now. So they are, every one of them. I say I don't want to bash the certification thing. Everyone, and then especially for those of you, and I'm going to mention this, if you're interested in, if you're looking for a first job, consulting companies, part of their evaluation every year on Salesforce is the number of certifications that their consultants have, and what kind of certifications. So I throw that out there sometimes, is things like Sales Cloud certification, any of the consultant certifications like Sales Cloud Consultant, Service Cloud Consultant, those are worth more points, right? Than so that can be a useful way to try to find that first job, is to go with a consulting partner and have certifications that help them climb that, that silver, gold, platinum ladder. So every certification, I will say, I absolutely learned stuff along the way. There wasn't anyone I ever took that I felt like I wasn't better off for having studied it. But I also, I think, realize now that I still think 3/4 of what I know I learned from experience. And I also know that a huge amount, especially as a developer, that a huge amount of what I do every day was never on any Salesforce certification. So I think that's, what I take with a grain of salt, is especially there's so many things I think around just kind of like fundamental programming concepts and best practices, or we're talking about like version control and command line, SFDX now, right? That there's no certification for any of this stuff, but you really do need to know it as a developer. So I feel like they're kind of a mixed bag, right? I've got a bunch. I've learned stuff every time, but I also, more and more appreciate that there is no substitute for experience. But the experience combined, and getting that first job is tough, but once you start to have the experience combined with the certifications, I think professionally you find yourself in a pretty strong place.
Okay. Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Speaking came to mind. How active were you in the local Salesforce community in Boston?
I'm never as active as I'd like to be. Just because I live a little bit, it's a bit of a hike out of the city. But I would go to a few Salesforce. I would try to go to a few Salesforce Saturdays every year. Like I presented at one right before this started. I would try to go to a few of the developer meetups. Um, Last year, I also spoke at Northeast Dreamin', which is kind of the New England, users conference. Um, so I try to be active. I'm never as active probably as wife and kids and commute and job. But it is. I feel like it's a great community, and if you give to the Salesforce community, it will generally give back to you.
Cool. Thank you so much for all this.
Absolutely.
Anyone have questions? Rob, Olga, Talanta, Sid, Maksat.
No questions. Just wanted to say thank you for sharing your experience and these good tips for
Thanks
the
for having me.
beginners, developers.
It is. There is. I'm going to say, like, you talk about being a beginner, but truly, and I know there's no substitute for just discipline and stick with it and do it every day, and it will come. If programming was truly an easy thing to learn to do, the job market would look very different than it does right now. That's just, but if it really was something that we could all just learn and be good at in 3 months, the job market would look very different than what it does. It's tough. I mean, it's a tough, hard thing to learn. But if I look at code that I wrote 2 years ago versus code I wrote today, I still have my first hello world trigger that I ever wrote, right, in one of my dev orgs. It's not that I got way smarter or anything else in 2 years. I just practiced a lot. And, I think that's Salesforce or anything. Is just if you stick with it, and just every day try to get a little bit better at what you do, it'll work.
Yes, I agree. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to believe it when you're when you're not there yet, but I agree. It's just a lot of hard work. And you were lucky. I was lucky that we both got into Salesforce working at a company that used Salesforce, so we got exposed. And that's ideal scenario, I think, to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question. So, definitely if you go back to 2018, for example, it was much more than a 40-hour-a-week job for you. If you include the studying, you were studying quite a bit on top of that. Is it still much more than a 40-hour-a-week job, or has that subsided?
No, but this is, I guess, because I still want to be so good they can't ignore me. So no, it doesn't stop. Like I never hit a point where I was like, man, I know it all, right? Like now it's like master programmer. I still try to get up early every day and study and master my craft. Things I've been trying to get better with. My goals this year are to try to get better with design patterns. Try to get better with some more fundamental computer science concepts that we talked about earlier. And I'm also working through Andrew Fawcett's Enterprise Architecture book, which is absolutely, a ton you can learn from it, but it's not I don't know if you've read it or worked on it, not an easy. So no, it's never stopped for me. I don't see it ever stopping. I don't know. I need to learn JavaScript. I need to get better at JavaScript next, or maybe it's time to learn React, or I want I wanted to write my first SFX plugin this year. I got to learn TypeScript to do that. So I don't know. Maybe I hope there never is a day where I'm like, oh, it's nothing else for me to do to get better here. Like, there's always another hill to climb.
Mm-hmm.
At what point in your career did you feel like you're a Salesforce developer? Was there some like? I think it's
Was it a gradual process?
yeah, or was it like
Yeah.
okay, I have to feel like I'm a Salesforce developer. I'm actually a developer because it's my title. But was there sometimes you feel like, am I really a developer?
You know what? And I won't lie that there are still some times right where I feel that way, even though like I code 8 hours a day. Like like I don't know, like I'm not using Docker. Like am I really like I don't know how React works. I think that always happens a little bit, but I don't know at what point I felt comfortable or like would just I'm a developer. Like I'm a programmer. That's what I do. I will say somewhere probably between year 1 and year 2. I think maybe where I finally felt good enough and confident. And I think I think for me, like as you started to get exposed to more developers, and you started to realize like, oh, hey, I can keep up with these guys. Like I'm as good as everybody else, right? That's when I started to feel more like, I'm a programmer. This is what I do. But it wasn't the day I passed PD1, even though I won it. I was like, I said I'm a developer, but I felt like I was kind of lying about it,
Have you ever failed a certification exam?
Oh, God, yeah, like half of them. Like half of them, easy.
Really?
Yeah. I always say, like, you don't have to list on your resume how many times it took you to pass.
Or what score you got?
I don't remember. Platform App Builder killed me, though. For some reason, I think that took me like 3 times or something.
Me too.
I don't know why.
I failed twice.
Yeah. I know. I have. So the 9 certifications I actually had to test for, I'm going to say I must have failed at least half of them the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's always been kind of my like, if I don't pass, I know what's on the test. I know what to, I have a better idea. I know what to study next time. I don't know anybody that is in this industry that hasn't failed certification exams. I mean, that's take it again next week.
Cool. Any other questions, guys? This is it. A chance.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you, Brooks, for sharing your story with us. And like listening you actually like really motivates me to do more, to study more, push harder. Because for example, I bought 2 courses on Udemy 2 weeks ago, and I didn't even start either. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, yes, I'm trying to find excuses for myself, like it's coronavirus. I have 2 kids who are running around, it's hard to concentrate, but that's all excuses, like looking at you, a full-time job, still like, getting up early, I don't know, doing this. It's really inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm glad. Hopefully it helped. And, connect with me on LinkedIn, and happy to talk anytime.
Yeah, Brooks, this is really your inspiring story, because I had asked Chris Hopper like almost a month ago, does he know anyone who changed a career and became a Salesforce developer? And I thought he forgot about it, but I think he was thinking the whole time, and he only remembered a couple of days ago, because there's so few of you.
I don't know. It was this was again. It was some. I think started with some thread where people are arguing about like whether we should use interfaces on Apex programming or not.
So, congratulations on making this journey. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks again for having me.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right, guys, take care. Thanks again.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Brooks.
Bye.